One voice at the right time can collapse an entire empire of lies. Last night, chosen ones, something shifted in the spirit realm and bled into the physical. Somebody you didn't even expect, somebody you didn't calculate into your story, stood up for you. And when they did, the whole atmosphere changed. And here's a fact that makes this even more spine-chilling. Studies show that a single witness with credibility can completely overturn the outcome of a case, even when 100 voices are against the accused. That's exactly what happened for you. For years, you carried the weight of isolation. People let you stand alone while they whispered behind closed doors, laughed at your struggle, and waited for your fall. But overnight, it all flipped. The one who stood for you wasn't just defending your name. They detonated the lies that were stacked against you like a Jenga tower. And you know what happens when one block is pulled at the right time? The whole thing collapses in front of everyone. And here's the funny part. Your enemies didn't see it coming. They thought the game was locked, the gossip sealed, and your silence was their victory. But out of nowhere, someone threw the biggest wrench into their plan. Picture it. They rehearsed their speech for weeks, ready to deliver the final word on you, and then, bam! Somebody they never expected interrupts like, "Actually, you're full of it." Now they're sitting there, red-faced, looking like they got caught cheating on an exam they swore they were acing. What just happened wasn't small. It wasn't coincidence. It was divine timing. The defense that came last night wasn't about sympathy. It was about truth, justice, and exposure. And the ripple effects. Oh, they've only just begun. Because once one person dares to defend you, others suddenly realize silence won't save them anymore. Chosen ones, buckle up. Last night was not the end of a fight. It was the beginning of a revolution in your favor. Number one, the silence around you was strategic, not abandonment. The silence around you was never proof that nobody cared. It was proof that something bigger was unfolding behind the scenes. For the longest time, it looked like you were left alone to fight battles that should have broken you. People who knew the truth stayed quiet, and it felt like betrayal. But what you didn't realize was that the silence was part of the strategy. Every person who kept their mouth shut wasn't ignoring you. They were watching who would expose themselves by moving against you. That silence was a trap, and your enemies walked right into it. There is a reason why some truths don't come out right away. If your defender had spoken too soon, it would have been dismissed as favoritism, brushed aside as bias, or ignored completely. But the longer the silence stretched, the more bold and reckless your enemies became. They grew so confident in their lies that they showed their true nature in full view. And when the defense finally broke that silence, it wasn't weak or uncertain. It was undeniable. It had weight, it had precision, and it landed with impact that couldn't be ignored. What happened last night was the unveiling of a carefully timed move. The silence was not absence. It was the build-up. It was heaven making sure every mask dropped, every pretender revealed themselves, and every hidden agenda surfaced. That way, when someone finally stood up for you, their defense wasn't just words. It was backed by evidence that had been quietly collecting over time. Suddenly, the people who had been so loud against you were caught in their own contradictions. Their stories didn't match, their motives didn't line up, and their power lost its grip in real time. This is why everything flipped overnight. It wasn't just about someone deciding to support you out of nowhere. It was about the right person, at the right moment, breaking the silence with authority. That silence that once felt like abandonment became the very thing that strengthened your case. Your enemies thought they had won because nobody was speaking for you. But that quiet was heaven's setup. And when it finally broke, it crushed every lie in a single strike. The silence was never weakness. It was strategy. And now, it's your victory. Number two, the one who defended you was watching longer than you knew. The one who defended you last night didn't just wake up and decide to step in. They had been watching for a long time, long enough to see patterns, long enough to gather the truth. Their defense wasn't a reaction. It was a move that had been quietly loading like a bullet in the chamber. People underestimate how dangerous patience can be. While others ran their mouths and spread lies, this person stayed in the background, collecting every detail, every contradiction, every slip-up. By the time they spoke, they weren't guessing. They knew. And that's what made their words hit so hard. When someone speaks without evidence, their defense can be brushed off as emotional or biased. But when someone speaks with knowledge, their words become impossible to discredit. That's what happened for you. The person who stood up wasn't there to play politics or score points. They were armed with facts. They had seen enough of your struggle, enough of the manipulation around you, enough of the double lives your enemies were living, and when they finally opened their mouth, it silenced the room. This is why the moment carried so much weight. Your enemies had been thriving on assumption. They told half-truths, exaggerated stories, and projected their own guilt onto you. And for a while it worked because nobody was challenging them. But when someone who had been quietly observing decided to step in, the whole game changed. Suddenly the lies didn't sound convincing anymore. Suddenly the spotlight shifted, and the more your defender spoke, the smaller your accusers became. What makes it even more powerful is the fact that this wasn't about sympathy. Sympathy fades. This was about conviction. The person who stood for you wasn't guessing about your character. They had seen it. They weren't speculating about your enemies. They had witnessed their schemes. So when they spoke, it didn't come across as opinion. It landed as fact, and facts dismantle lies every single time. The beauty of it is this. Your enemies had no counter. They didn't prepare for someone credible to step forward, because they believed the silence around you meant safety for them. They never realized someone was watching closely, waiting for the exact moment to step in. Last night that moment arrived, and it shattered everything. Number 3, the power shift didn't happen gradually. It collapsed in seconds. The shift that happened wasn't slow, and that's exactly why it hit so hard. For years, the balance seemed fixed against you. Your enemies looked secure, your position looked fragile, and it felt like the weight would never tilt in your favor. Then suddenly, in one moment, it all collapsed. That's how power works. It doesn't always crumble gradually. Sometimes it collapses instantly, like a structure that looked solid until the one weak point was struck. Last night, that weak point was hit, and the whole board flipped in your direction before anyone could even process what was happening. The reason this feels so shocking is because your enemies believed they had built something indestructible. They relied on repetition, on gossip, on the idea that if they said something long enough, people would accept it as truth. And for a while, it worked. They got comfortable in their lies, and that comfort made them arrogant. But arrogance always leaves cracks. All it takes is one moment of truth, one word of authority, to turn all of that false stability into rubble. That's exactly what happened when someone finally stood up for you. When the shift came, it wasn't just about words being spoken. It was about weight changing sides. Your enemies lost their confidence in an instant. Their smirks turned into silence. Their certainty turned into panic. The same people who had been mocking you, dismissing you, and treating you as if you had no voice suddenly realized they weren't in control anymore. The power they thought they had wasn't real. It was borrowed, it was fragile, and it only lasted because nobody had challenged it. The second it was challenged, the whole thing fell apart. That's why overnight everything flipped. It wasn't progress, it was collapse. It wasn't a negotiation, it was a demolition. And when a collapse happens, there's no going back. The respect they took from you, the voice they tried to bury, the credibility they thought they stole, it all came rushing back to you in one strike. That's what real justice feels like. It doesn't crawl in quietly, it storms the room. It comes so suddenly that those who thought they were winning don't even get the chance to adjust. That's why last night wasn't just a defense, it was a reset. Everything changed in seconds, and now the balance will never be the same. Number 4. Your name went from target to testimony. For so long, your name was treated like a warning label. It was whispered in corners, passed around as gossip, or used as an example of what not to be. People who didn't know you built entire narratives out of fragments and lies. They thought they owned your reputation, like they could shape how the world would remember you. But last night changed all of that. When that person stood up for you, they didn't just defend you. They rewrote the headline attached to your name. In one public act, they took everything that was used against you and reframed it as proof of your strength. This is the kind of shift that can't be faked. It wasn't about someone saying, leave them alone. It was about someone saying, look at what they've endured and look at who they are now. Your story was no longer a scandal, it became a testimony. Instead of your name being a warning sign, it became a reference point for resilience. What your enemies tried to use as evidence of your failure is now evidence of your survival. And survival carries a weight that gossip can't compete with. That's the power of credibility. When the right person speaks, the whole perception of your story flips. People who were once comfortable believing lies now have to rethink everything they thought they knew about you. They're forced to reconcile their version of you with the reality standing in front of them. And the reality is undeniable. You're not broken, you're not the villain, you're living proof of endurance and integrity. What happened last night also marks a permanent shift. Reputation is currency in this world, and for years they tried to bankrupt yours. But now your name is backed by evidence, by truth, and by a witness with authority. That can't be undone. The stigma they tried to brand you with has been replaced with something far more powerful. A story of survival that exposes their lies and elevates your truth. Your name went from being a weapon they used against you to a banner of strength they can't tear down. And that's the kind of rebranding no smear campaign can touch. Number 5. Loyalty came from a corner they never expected. For the longest time you thought loyalty had a predictable shape. You assumed it would come from the people you sacrificed for, the ones you poured into, the ones who swore they had your back. But betrayal taught you the opposite. It showed up in familiar faces, in voices you trusted, in hands you once held. That's why last night's defense was so shocking. It didn't come from the circle you built. It came from a corner you never even looked at. Someone they overlooked, someone they dismissed, someone who had nothing to gain and everything to risk by standing up for you. This is what makes it so powerful. Your enemies counted on their control over the narrative. They believed they had locked every door and bought every voice. They convinced themselves that loyalty was something they could purchase or threaten into silence. But the person who stood for you wasn't for sale, and that made them dangerous. They were the wild card in the deck, the one no one had factored in, the one whose integrity couldn't be manipulated. There's a deep beauty in that kind of loyalty. It's not rooted in obligation, history, or guilt. It's rooted in truth. It comes from someone who doesn't need you to be perfect to defend you. Someone who saw you clearly without the distortions of gossip and decided that silence would make them complicit. And when that kind of loyalty steps forward, it cuts sharper than betrayal ever could. It exposes not only your enemies, but also the fake friends who stayed silent. Last night, that defense shattered an illusion. Your enemies thought they had built a fortress of control around you. They thought they knew every possible move, but the one who stood for you was invisible to their calculations, immune to their tactics. They weren't scared of being blacklisted, bullied, or bribed, and that's why their voice was so disruptive. It carried a freedom that your enemies don't understand. In that moment, loyalty stopped being a promise on someone's lips and became an action no one expected. It reminded you and everyone watching that real defense rarely comes from where you're looking. It comes from the corners they never think to guard, and when it arrives, it levels the whole playing field. Number 6. The defense wasn't about friendship, it was about truth. What made last night different is that the defense didn't come dressed in emotion. It wasn't someone rushing in because they liked you or because they felt sorry for you. Sympathy is fragile. It can be swayed, silenced, or manipulated. But truth is untouchable. The person who stood up for you didn't speak from a place of loyalty to your personality. They spoke from a place of loyalty to facts. And facts don't bend to popularity contests or social pressure. Your enemies were banking on everyone treating your situation like gossip. Something subjective, open to opinion, something that could be spun however they wanted. That's why they were so bold, because as long as it looked like opinion versus opinion, they could drown you out. But the second someone stepped in with truth, their whole game collapsed. You can argue with a perspective, you can debate a feeling, but you cannot undo evidence. That's what they weren't prepared for. This is why the defense hit so hard. It wasn't about someone saying, "I believe in them." It was about someone saying, "I've seen the facts, and they don't line up with the lies." That's a different kind of defense altogether, because it doesn't require convincing, it simply exposes. The truth doesn't ask for approval. It doesn't need a majority vote. It just stands, and when it stands, everything that isn't aligned with it crumbles under its weight. What happened last night reminded everyone watching that truth has a voice of its own. It doesn't whisper, it doesn't hesitate. It cuts through noise like a blade, and the person who stood up for you was bold enough to let it speak. That's what makes it unstoppable. Even if every mouth in the room tries to argue, the truth is already lodged in the minds of those who heard it. They can't unhear it. They can't unsee it. The exposure has already happened. So no, last night wasn't about someone siding with you out of pity or preference. It was about someone stepping into the gap and declaring what couldn't be denied any longer. The lies were loud, but the truth was louder. And now, no matter how hard your enemies try to spin it, they can't erase what's been revealed. Number 7. Their whole script fell apart mid-sentence. For years they had built their narrative like a play. Every accusation was rehearsed, every insult carefully crafted, every story polished until it sounded convincing. They told it so many times that even they began to believe it. They counted on their repetition to make it reality, on their confidence to make it seem unshakable. But all of that was an act, and like every act, it needed the audience to stay quiet for the illusion to work. Last night, that illusion finally shattered. When your defender spoke, it wasn't just a rebuttal, it was a wrecking ball. They didn't come with speculation or emotional outbursts. They came with precision. They spoke with the weight of evidence, with the kind of clarity that cuts through noise. And in that moment, the script your enemies had been performing for years began to crumble in real time. Their practiced lines lost their power because the context had changed. What once sounded persuasive now came off as desperate. What once looked like certainty now looked like performance. There's something devastating about watching a liar lose their grip mid-sentence. You can see the shift in their body language, the crack in their tone, the way their eyes search for a new line that isn't there. That's what happened when your defender spoke. They didn't just counter the narrative, they exposed it for what it really was, theater, not truth. And the moment that exposure happened, the audience stopped clapping. This is why their accusations suddenly started sounding like comedy. Lies are only convincing when they're unchallenged. Once they're confronted with truth, their edges become ridiculous, their logic collapses, and their confidence looks like overacting. People who had nodded along to their stories before were now raising eyebrows, questioning everything, feeling the discomfort of realizing they had been played. Last night wasn't just about someone standing up for you. It was about pulling the curtain back on an entire production. The script fell apart because it wasn't built on reality, and once reality walked into the room, their performance could no longer hold. Their power wasn't taken from them, it evaporated. And now the story isn't about their accusations, it's about their exposure. Number 8. The defender wasn't protecting you. They were exposing them. What happened last night wasn't a rescue. It was a reveal. The person who stood up for you wasn't stepping in to hold your hand or to polish your reputation. They weren't trying to make people like you or to smooth over the damage others had caused. What they did was far more dangerous to your enemies. They turned the spotlight away from you and directly onto them. For years, the people who plotted against you operated in the shadows, confident that they could manipulate the narrative without ever being exposed. They relied on darkness to protect them, but darkness only works until someone drags the truth into the light. That's exactly what your defender did. They weren't motivated by sympathy, they were motivated by justice. They saw the lies, the manipulations, and the traps being set. And instead of just saying, "This is wrong," they showed it. They dismantled the performance your enemies had built and laid out the evidence like a public ledger. The room shifted not because someone said you were good, but because someone proved your accusers were corrupt. This is why the moment carried so much power. Saving your reputation would have been a bandage. Exposing theirs was a weapon. It flipped the narrative completely. All of a sudden, the very people who had been painting you as the villain found themselves on trial. Their own words, their own actions, their own schemes became the case against them. And because the truth was backed by evidence, there was nowhere for them to run. They couldn't hide behind charm, intimidation, or denial anymore. Your defender's voice did more than protect you. It created accountability. It forced the masks off and made the hidden obvious. Corruption that had been whispered about became undeniable. The same crowd that once saw you as a target now had to face a new reality. The real danger was never you. It was the people attacking you. And now, their secrets aren't secrets anymore. They've been dragged into daylight. And once that happens, there's no going back. That's why last night was bigger than defense. It wasn't a shield, it was a mirror. And that mirror didn't just show your innocence. It showed their guilt, raw and unedited, for everyone to see. Number 9, chain reaction of guilt just began. The moment someone finally stood up for you, something powerful shifted, not just in your favor, but inside the minds of everyone who had been watching silently. For years, people saw what was happening to you. They knew it was wrong. They knew the stories didn't add up. But fear, convenience, or selfishness kept them quiet. They stood back, convincing themselves that silence was safety. Last night shattered that illusion. The first voice of defense acted like a trigger. It made silence feel like guilt, and guilt is heavy. People don't like to feel complicit. They like to believe they're neutral, that doing nothing is harmless. But neutrality always sides with the abuser. When someone finally steps forward with courage, it's a mirror for everyone else. It shows them what they could have done but didn't. It forces them to face the reality that their silence wasn't neutral. It was participation. And once that realization hits, shame begins to rise. Now that shame becomes a motivator, not because they've suddenly become brave or moral, but because self-preservation kicks in. Nobody wants to be remembered as the one who knew the truth and said nothing. Nobody wants their name attached to cowardice when the truth is exposed. So they begin to scramble, trying to align themselves with the side of truth, trying to rewrite their role in the story. You'll see people who once avoided you now trying to defend you. You'll see people who never spoke up suddenly telling others they always knew the accusations were lies. This isn't nobility, it's survival. The first defender broke the dam, and now the water of accountability is spilling everywhere. People who were silent will try to cleanse themselves of guilt by rushing to the side of truth. Some will do it sincerely, others will do it to save face. Either way, it creates a chain reaction. The lies lose power because the crowd that once enabled them begins to dissolve. This is the hidden power of one voice. It doesn't just protect you, it exposes the silence of others. It forces a reckoning, and that reckoning changes the whole environment. After last night, nobody can pretend they didn't know anymore. The truth is out, and silence is now a stain. Number 10. Heaven timed that outburst with precision. What happened last night was not coincidence. It was choreography. That person could have spoken up months ago, even years ago. They saw enough back then to know the truth, but heaven understands timing better than we ever could. Speaking too soon might have given your enemies time to regroup, respin the narrative, or bury evidence. Silence wasn't neglect. It was positioning. The stage had to be set so that when the defense finally came, it would land like a strike, not a whisper. This is how divine timing works. God doesn't just care about what happens, He cares about when it happens. If your defender had spoken earlier, it might have been dismissed as bias, brushed off as rumor, or drowned out by the noise of your accusers. But heaven waited until the noise reached its peak, until the crowd was fully invested in the lie, until every mask had dropped and every agenda was exposed. Then, at the height of their confidence, truth entered the room. That's why it felt like an explosion. That moment wasn't just a defense, it was a dismantling. Every word your enemies had rehearsed, every scheme they had built, every smear they had repeated cracked under the weight of that perfectly timed truth. It wasn't just about clearing your name. It was about ensuring that the exposure was undeniable and irreversible. Timing was the weapon. And the impact? It was total. Your enemies weren't just embarrassed, they were caught off guard. They had no counter-strategy prepared because they never imagined someone would step forward at the exact moment their arrogance peaked. That's why their power collapsed so quickly. It wasn't only the words your defender spoke, it was the timing of those words. Heaven does this to show the difference between luck and strategy. Luck feels accidental, strategy feels surgical. What happened last night was surgical. It showed that your story was never random, your suffering wasn't invisible, and your vindication wasn't delayed. It was being set up for maximum impact. God waited until the room was loudest against you, then flipped the atmosphere in one strike. That's why last night wasn't just a moment of defense. It was proof that your battle has always been under divine timing. Number 11. What was private war is now public victory. For years you fought battles nobody could see. You carried wounds that never made it to the surface because speaking them out loud only brought more disbelief, more dismissal, more isolation. People treated your pain like an exaggeration, a performance, or a flaw in your character. They called you dramatic, paranoid, or weak, not because you were any of those things, but because it was easier for them to doubt you than to face the truth of what was happening. That was the cruelest part of it, not just the suffering itself, but the silence that surrounded it. Last night shattered that silence. The defense that came forward didn't just defend your name, it dragged the truth out of hiding. What was whispered became spoken. What was denied became proven. Suddenly, your private war wasn't a rumor anymore. It was a revelation. People who dismissed you now have to sit with the evidence. People who mocked you now have to confront the reality they ignored. And that changes everything. When pain becomes visible, it transforms the story. You're no longer the problem they painted you to be. You're the survivor. You're the one who endured without proof, without applause, without validation, and still stood. That shift in perspective is more powerful than sympathy. It's respect. And respect built on evidence is the kind that can't be taken back once it's given. This is why last night was bigger than a defense. It wasn't about someone saying, "Leave them alone." It was about someone holding up a mirror and saying, "Look at what's really been happening." That act didn't just clear your name, it cleared the fog. It forced everyone who doubted you to rethink the narrative they believed. Now your story stands in the open, and the truth isn't fragile anymore. It's public, it's undeniable, and it's working in your favor. What was once a lonely, invisible battle has turned into a visible victory. And once the truth is out, it never goes back into hiding. You're no longer the person fighting in the shadows. You're the one standing in the light, and every lie they built around you is burning away. Number 12. They weren't just defending you, they were declaring war. The moment that person stood up for you, it wasn't just a gesture of support. It was an act of war. They weren't merely stepping in to shield you from the attacks, they were openly challenging the entire system that was built to tear you down. In that instant, a line was drawn in the sand. It wasn't a quiet defense whispered under the breath. It was a loud and public declaration. Enough is enough. Your enemies didn't just lose their grip on your narrative. They gained a new opponent who isn't afraid of them, who isn't entangled in their power games, and who has the credibility to dismantle their influence. This is the difference between protection and confrontation. Protection tries to minimize damage, but confrontation dismantles the source of the damage altogether. The person who stood up for you wasn't trying to calm things down or keep the peace. They weren't interested in negotiations or half-truths. They were interested in truth, exposure, and justice. And they came armed with all three. That's why your enemies immediately lost their footing. They weren't facing an emotional outburst. They were facing a fearless, informed adversary who doesn't back down once they've chosen a side. That's also why the atmosphere shifted so dramatically. Before last night, your enemies operated with the confidence of bullies who believed nobody would challenge them. They relied on silence and fear to keep their power intact. But when someone credible enters the fight, their entire strategy collapses. Lies lose power when someone authoritative calls them out. Manipulation loses grip when someone refuses to be intimidated. And suddenly, the the people who once circled you feel the heat of another spotlight, one that isn't on you, but on them. This moment marked a new phase in your story. It's no longer just about you standing alone. Someone else has stepped onto the battlefield and turned your private struggle into a public reckoning. Your enemies thought they were only fighting you. But now they're facing a voice bigger, louder, and more relentless than anything they prepared for. And when a person like that declares war on injustice, the fight stops being one-sided. It becomes a movement. This wasn't a defense, it was a battle cry, and once a battle cry rings out, it can't be taken back. Number 13. Your survival just became untouchable evidence. Your survival is no longer just a story you tell, it's evidence that can't be cross-examined. Last night wasn't about clever arguments or emotional speeches, it was about undeniable proof. The fact that you're still here, standing, unbroken after everything designed to erase you, is the ultimate contradiction to every lie they've spread. People can dispute opinions, twist narratives, and fabricate scandals, but they cannot rewrite the fact that you survived. Your life has become its own courtroom testimony, a living exhibit that dismantles false accusations without you even having to say a word. This is the power of endurance. It turns your existence into evidence. It's one thing for someone to defend you with words, but it's another for your mere presence to shatter the entire script they wrote against you. You've outlasted sabotage, character assassination, and silent wars. That longevity makes every accusation against you look ridiculous in hindsight. Your survival is a mirror reflecting the truth back at those who tried to break you. Their lies age poorly because the reality of you standing there refuses to go away. When people see someone still upright after relentless storms, they instinctively question the narrative they were fed. If you were truly what your enemies claimed, you wouldn't still be here, stable, and growing stronger. The math doesn't add up for them anymore. Their story collapses under the weight of your resilience. The longer you stand, the more their credibility decays. That's why last night was so powerful. It wasn't just about someone standing up for you. It was about the world realizing your survival itself was the defense they'd been trying to ignore. From now on, your name won't just be associated with struggle. It will be synonymous with proof. Proof that you didn't break. Proof that their narrative failed. Proof that what they tried to hide is now visible to everyone. And once survival becomes evidence, it's untouchable. It can't be bribed, silenced, or discredited because it's not an opinion. It's reality. Your existence has become the one thing they can't spin, and in a world built on manipulation that makes you more powerful than ever. Number 14. The fear has now shifted camps. The fear has finally changed hands. For years you lived under the shadow of betrayal, constantly questioning who was for you and who was against you. You braced yourself for the next attack, the next smear, the next quiet abandonment. That tension lived in your body like a permanent guest, and they fed off it. They counted on your silence, your caution, your isolation. But last night shifted something irreversible. The fear they built around you snapped back on them. Now they're the ones waking up in a panic, replaying the moment someone powerful, credible, and fearless stood for you in public. They're realizing the protection around you isn't hidden anymore. It's loud, visible, and untouchable. That's the difference a single moment of truth can make. The system they built relied on you being outnumbered and outvoiced. As long as you were isolated, their lies could stand unchallenged. But when someone with weight stands up for you, it destroys that illusion instantly. Fear thrives in shadows and silence. It evaporates when there's light and witnesses. What they thought was a private campaign to destroy you has now become a public spectacle exposing them. And exposure is their kryptonite. Now, they're forced to confront a reality they never prepared for. You're no longer an easy target. You're protected, not just by quiet endurance, but by a vocal force that refuses to let you stand alone. They can't predict what will come next, because the power dynamics have flipped. The very people who once felt invincible in their attacks are now walking carefully, second-guessing every move. Their whispers sound shaky. Their plots feel risky. Their confidence has cracked. This isn't just a psychological shift. It's a spiritual one. Fear moves when power moves, and last night, power moved. They're not just worried about losing control of the narrative, they're worried about consequences they never thought they'd face. That's why the atmosphere feels different now. The same panic you once carried has migrated into their camp. They thought they were hunting you. Now they're realizing they've cornered themselves. And once fear shifts sides, it doesn't move back. It settles where the guilt lives. What happened last night wasn't just a moment, it was a turning point. For years, you've been misread, underestimated, and attacked in silence. But now, the silence is over. The shadows are gone, and the truth has stepped into the center of the room. The person who stood up for you didn't just defend you. They detonated the false narratives that were built to cage you. They made it undeniable that your survival is not an accident but a living testimony. Every accusation that once stuck to your name now looks ridiculous in the light of your endurance. The story flipped because power flipped. Fear has switched sides, credibility has shifted camps, and the protection around you is no longer invisible. This isn't just about being cleared. It's about being crowned. What was a private war has become a public victory. What was once whispered against you is now shouted for you. You aren't just walking free, you're walking with proof. Proof of who you are, proof of what you survived, and proof that nothing they tried has worked. From this point on, your name carries a new weight. Not scandal, not pity, evidence, survival, authority. And as your enemies scramble to rewrite their scripts, more people will align with truth, not out of loyalty but out of necessity, because no one wants to be remembered as the one who stayed silent while you stood tall. This is the end of their narrative and the beginning of yours. You are no longer the hunted, you're the headline, the proof, the turning point in their own story. The tables haven't just turned, the whole game has changed, and now everyone watching knows you were never the problem. You were the proof all along. If this video hit different and made you feel the shift in energy, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss when the truth drops. Smash the like button if you felt that power flip. Drop a comment below sharing your story or your reaction, and share this video with someone who needs to see that even silence can turn into unstoppable defense. Stay connected, stay awakened, and watch how your reality shifts when truth steps into the light. God bless you.